Well, for the first time in U.S. history, at least 15 states have either approved or introduced bills banning Sharia law, the Islamic legal code. In Tennessee, a proposed bill could make it a felony, punishable by up to 15 years in jail, for Muslims to perform everyday religious practices like praying, giving to charity or fasting, because that would be defined as banned Sharia practices.
You know, unfortunately, it's deeply disturbing for those of us who have families who, for instance, many people's wives wear traditional clothing when they go out, or at least a head covering with Western style clothing. But increasingly we're seeing this antagonism in the United States, and I think it's a result of many now since 9/11 it's been just unrelenting attacks on talk radio, an incredible number of books that have come out. You know, it's a good point. I think there was a book written, John Stockwell, a former CIA operative, wrote a book called In Search of Enemies. And one of the things that we've noted in the United States is, despite the declining purchasing power of the dollar, despite the spiraling debt, the one sacred cow of the American deficit or budget is military spending, and military spending is actually at Cold War numbers, and if you adjust it for inflation, it's quite stunning what's happened, and that's all been justified by the war on terror. More people died in the United States last year from dog bites than died from terrorist attacks. Less than 3 people. Many of these attacks, in fact, according to the FBI, are actually done by fundamentalist Christians against abortion doctors and things like that. So I think there's just an immense overblown aspect to this whole thing that to me is deeply troubling, because I think things get very distorted. They call it the media magnifying glass that can really distort a threat or distort some statistical insignificance out there into something very significant.
Now, of course,
aspects of the Sharia I think that are just completely distorted. And another aspect that I think is really important is the fact that in the United States, by and large, you have a population of civil people. In fact, I think the demonstration that happened in Yorba Linda is an anomaly. I think the majority of Americans are decent people that acknowledge multiculturalism. Mm-hmm. America has always been a multicultural society. We have Amish people that don't use technology in the United States. There's no iPhones or iPads in Amish land. And so America has always allowed for people to explore alternative lifestyles, as long as you do not go against the laws of the land. And that is Sharia. If you live in America, you have to follow American law. I think that in terms of travel, there has been problems for people that are Muslim. I think the government, to be fair, has tried to redress these oversights. Generally, though, I think American Muslims need to acknowledge the fact that there are still more hate crimes against the Jewish community, which is a profoundly enfranchised community in the United States, but there are still more hate crimes against the Jewish community than there are against the Muslim community. But what's troubling is the sentiment that has been increasing, and we're seeing a type of virulence of this attitude that's definitely on the increase. While there are not a lot of hate crimes against the Muslims, there are, and there have been mosques that have been attacked, even a few that have been burnt. Pigs' heads have been thrown in mosques, things like that. But generally, the Muslims, I think, have been protected in their houses and their homes. I think the FBI, despite some of the entrapment problems that have occurred, has tried to keep the Muslim community safe. So I want to be fair, and I do think that overall the Muslims are still in a good condition in the United States, but this constant barrage of attacks and presenting Islam as an evil religion, and the talk show radio hosts that day in and day out talk about this, these things take an effect, and I think that needs to be acknowledged. There is an acceptable attitude towards Muslims. Be critical of Islam. People can be critical of Islam. But the idea of mocking people, of attacking them, of calling them demonically inspired terrorists, that the Quran breeds terrorism, these things are just untruths that are being spread around as gospel.
Okay. Seeing Sharia law, what do you see as the consequences of that?
Well, I think, first of all, there's an immense amount of misunderstanding about what Sharia is. There are only two sections in any traditional text on sacred law that deal with governance, and that only involves government agencies. They're called ahkam al-sultaniya. Sharia is mostly about purification, about prayer, about fasting, about paying your zakat, a poor tax, to help the poor and disenfranchised. That is the bulk of the Sharia. The idea that you have to enact laws in the United States to prevent Sharia from being established or enacted is absurd, because the Constitution of the United States already states that that is the basis of the law of the land. So anything that is from Sharia that would be considered unconstitutional is ipso facto unacceptable in the United States. And I think to me, one of the interesting things about this is that one area that is applicable in the United States is Islamic commercial law that prohibits a lot of the financial instruments that are out there causing devastating effects on Americans. And I think it's very interesting that certainly the bankers would not want that aspect of Islam to become widespread knowledge amongst American people, the prohibition of exploitative financial instruments, and the fact that a lot of usury laws that still exist in the United States are completely ignored. They go into states like the Dakotas where they don't have usury laws, and so these credit card companies can completely exploit people, when I think in the 19th century Americans would have been up in arms about a lot of what's going on now.
We had